This episode's movie is an absolute classic. It's perfect for the spooky season in that not only does it take place in an uber-gothic Transylvanian castle, but that castle is full of vampires hell-bent on gaining ultimate vampiric power through a relic called the Bloodstone. The Bloodstone is purported to drip the blood of the saints and grant immense strength and eternal power to the vampire who possesses it. I'm Mike Cadaver, and welcome to this episode of Empire of the Full Moon, the show where I talk about anything and everything to do with Charles Band and his whole film empire. Today's movie is Bloodstone, Subspecies II from 1993. You're probably wondering why, since I haven't talked about the original Subspecies film on the show yet, why I'm skipping over it and actually talking about the sequel. Well, it's because earlier this month, Charles Band invited about 100 or so of his closest friends over for the third installment of what's called the Church of Chills. A screening of Bloodstone Subspecies II was part of the main event, along with an interview and Q&A with the director and the main stars. I figured I'd be able to talk about both the movie and the event in this episode, so after you're done subscribing to my channel, like right now, and liking this video, we'll get right into it. Okay, let's start by talking about the movie itself. In 1991, backed by Paramount Pictures in the distribution department, Full Moon Features released Subspecies and introduced the world to the vampire Radu Varislas, a vampire that lived deep in the Carpathian Mountains and was just greasy and gross and all that stuff. But Radu and his brother Stefan are vampiric brothers. Stefan is the noble and kind vampire, the kind that your mother reads about in her dirty vampire romantasy books. And Radu, on the other hand, is only out for himself and ultimate power. A group of students get in the middle of this vampire feud, and their names are Michelle, Mara, Lillian. A long story short, and spoiler if you haven't seen it, Stefan ends up killing Radu and is forced to bite his love interest, the love of his life named Michelle, played by Laura Tate in the original, turning into a vampire, and then they sleep. Reprising his role as Radu, Anders Hove is back in all his slimy, long-figured gory for the subsequent movie, Bloodstone. Replacing Laura May Tate in the role of Michelle is the amazing Denise Duff, and I'm sure Miss Tate would have been great for reprising a role, but Denise Duff would take this character, Michelle Morgan, and make it her own. She actually played the role in parts 2 through 5 and has carved out a really nice niche for herself in cult cinema because of it. We also have a few newcomers to the series with Melanie Shatner, who plays Rebecca Morgan, who, by the way, is William Shatner's daughter. And Rebecca is Michelle's sister, who flies out to Romania to try and help her sister when she gets a distressed call from Michelle there in Romania. We are also introduced to a few brand new characters, such as U.S. Embassy agent Mel Thompson, who is played by the hunky Kevin Spiritus, who horror fans will surely recognize as Nick in Friday the 13th, The New Blood. We have Pamela Gordon playing Mummy, a decrepit old vampire and Radu's undead sorceress mother. Finally, we have Lieutenant Marin, a Romanian police officer played by Ion Haiduk, and Michael Denish, who plays the Romanian Professor Popescu. This movie is directed by Ted Nicolau, the man who directed every single one of these subspecies, film 1 through 5, including a spin-off called The Vampire Journals from 1997, not to be confused with the awful teen series from the 2000s called The Vampire Diaries. I think that if anybody watching this and hasn't seen the Subspecies series yet and thinks that this has anything to do with The Vampire Diaries, they would immediately turn this video off, and quite frankly, I would not blame them. Even though Ted did direct all of the Subspecies films, Charles Band and David Pabian wrote the original. Ted Nicolau went on to write all these films from 2 forward, including Vampire Journals, like I said. Part 2 starts up moments after the original ends, and though Radu has been beheaded and staked through the heart, his little minions came to the rescue, in one of the most impressive displays of effects in a full moon film. Radu's head is placed next to his body by the subspecies, close enough that the tendons are activated and fly from the severed head of Radu, attaching it to Radu's open neck hole, pulling them together. Amazing! By the way, it looked great. Meanwhile, with David's stop-motion animated and rod-control puppets, these subspecies pull out the stake from Radu's heart. And I need to pause here for a second, because I dug deep into some of the special features here, and I did not realize that those little dudes that sprouted from Radu's severed fingers in the original film were actually the subspecies talked about in the title. Like Charles Band, while on stage at the Church of Chills, told a story about how they came to be, and we all know how it's Charles's MO to create a poster for a film before they do any other kind of development there. The poster comes before writing a story overview. It comes before any other kind of conceptualization. While the poster, the one with a bunch of minions carrying a woman, I'll put it up there, it was made before even presenting it to Ted. Well, Ted did some development with Charles, and they thought the concept was great. He just wanted to get rid of those little dudes. But Charles said something to the effect of, how can we have a movie called Subspecies if the subspecies are taken out of it? Well, this kind of blew my mind. Like, I've been watching these since the early 90s, and I have assumed that the subspecies that they were referring to were the vampires. As an aside, these little dudes look amazing, like I said, both as a stop-motion animation and as a rod puppetry. And we're just so lucky to have David Allen's work and design on these, because we almost got a bunch of dudes in skin-tight outfits running around on stages with oversized set pieces. And as I watched some of the clips, I don't know if that would have been cool or completely ridiculous, but I'm thinking, like, I think about that scene in Army of Darkness in the windmill where the tiny ashes are running around. But anyways, I'll get back to it. Anyhow, when Radu is reanimated, he opens a coffin of his brother whose body was clutching the Bloodstone. Radu takes care of Stefan, but is interrupted before he's able to grab the Bloodstone. Michelle wakes up as a newly sired vampire grabs the Bloodstone from Stefan and takes off to Bucharest. Another aside, the design of the Bloodstone from the original movie to this one is like 1,000 times better. In the first one, it looked like a gross plastic thing where Angus Scrimm gross meowed as he squeezed out one sticky drop of blood. But this design has some glass antique looking thing held by what kind of looks like a golden claw. It's such a huge improvement. The first one's design, I really hate it. In fact, it almost ruins the movie for me. I'm glad that they changed that. Anyhow, though alive, Radu is still very weak. He gathers back his strength with the help of Mummy, who is a decrepit bandaged witch who is adept at black magic and is able to help Radu gain back his strength. And it's not long before he's back on track looking for ultimate power that will be given to him by drinking from the Bloodstone. These two have an interesting relationship, whereas Radu is seemingly always in control in a sordid kind of way when it comes to the humans and his brother in the first movie. He acts more submissive towards, and maybe even a little frightened of Mummy. Well, Radu decides that he has a little thing for Michelle, which Mummy does not like, so basically his mission has grown to include finding and controlling Michelle along with the Bloodstone, but Mummy doesn't want any part of that. Meanwhile, Michelle is in Bucharest with the Bloodstone. She finds herself at a hotel and makes a desperate call to her sister for help, like I mentioned in the beginning. Freaked out, her sister Rebecca makes the trip to Bucharest to find Michelle and do what she can to help and potentially even save her. But after that call, Michelle goes back to her room and is discovered sleeping in a hotel bathtub by the housekeeping crew, and the cops are called. So she goes into hiding. Her sister teams up with the U.S. Embassy agent Mel Thompson and Lieutenant Marin, who is a Romanian police officer. And actually they get Professor Popescu. I didn't want to mess that up. But he's a professor of history, folklore, and mythology. And these three are very different in their approach to attempt to solve this mystery. It ultimately takes Professor Popescu's insistence that the vampires are real, along with the bizarre experiences that the team goes through to get on the right track in attempting to find and save Michelle. Will Rebecca and her team of misfits find and rescue Michelle from the evil clutches of Radu? Will Radu obtain the Bloodstone and thus be an uber-powerful vampire? Was it in the contract of every hot chick in this movie to show at least a little nudity? Find out by watching Bloodstone, Subspecies II from 1993. All right, the first thing that I have to talk about when it comes to this movie, and the original, and actually the other sequels as well, but just mostly this one, in number 3 actually, it's just how amazing it looked. Like I talked about the special effects in Radu's resurrection scene as well as Stefan's destruction scene. I also talked about the subspecies design, animation, puppetry, but man, these locations, both interior and exterior, were amazing. Though there were some amazing sound stages that were designed, put together, but there were castles, ruins that had an amazing, they were amazing inside and outside. They used and actually stayed in a place called Corvin Castle. The authenticity of this castle really added a lot to the credibility of the production. And I talk about this every single episode, the small things that are done that Charles Band does in his movies that make him have just a little bit more credit. But I listened to the commentary on the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray came in that coffin case, which I have. This commentary had Ted Nicolau, Denise Duff, and Anders Hove. They did a great job describing where specific scenes were filmed and what part of the castle. Super interesting stuff. They filmed a lot of scenes in the city of Bucharest. The hotel that Michelle found and stayed in was actually the Romanian Athenaeum. It's actually a very prestigious concert hall, home to the George Enescu Philharmonic. It's just a gorgeous building with its dome and ornate interiors. Like, this is just a gorgeous building, and it's front and center in this movie, and I could go on and on about locations, but I don't want to get too pedantic. Also, during the commentary, they were going fast, and I suck at spelling Romanian words, but I remember locations like Stirbe Palace outside of Bucharest, among others, but like I said, I'll skip that. One of my favorite things about this movie, and this series, by the way, is the amazing use of shadows when it comes to casting them on giant Romanian buildings. It's used as a genius way to signal that Radu is teleporting. Not only do these shadows kill, but the sound that goes along with it, and with the visual, is just perfect. In fact, to me, this has been the mark of this franchise. Quite frankly, I don't remember how much it was used in the other films in the series, but I remember this so vividly from watching these in the 90s on VHS tapes. It made a huge impression on me, so much so that it's basically why I fell in love with these movies in the first place. And straight up, that was just so inventive. And the thing is, too, it's probably very inexpensive. Like I said, another way Charles Band's films outshoot their budget. There was one scene which a shadow was animated, and I thought that was okay, but it didn't hold a candle to the other great usages of the shadow cast on those large buildings. I think that the only thing I don't love about this series is Radu's elongated fingers. I'm sure they had their reasons for including that, but how does he wipe his ass or pick his nose, right? I mean, also they look kind of rubbery and they kind of shake like unnaturally, and it's just does that a little bit too much, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I figured I was gushing for so long, so I figured I'd mention that just to kind of pull everything back. Bloodstone and Bloodstorm Subspecies II were actually filmed at the same time, or at least back to back. The cast and crew actually lived in Romania for over 70 days, and I dare say that Bloodstone and Bloodstorm are my two favorite films in the franchise. Even though I do love all the others, I've already talked about Bloodrise Subspecies 5 on this show, so go grab my thoughts on that one in that other video, but I do love that too. And I was just pumped that it came out. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. I was just pumped that we had another one after all these years. But needless to say that this is one of my absolute favorite film franchises of all time. Not just one of my favorite full moon film franchises, but I purchased this movie and series a few times over. I took a couple of pictures that I'll put on the screen now. These are mine. These are in my office right now. So I'll just take quick pictures. I talked about the Coffin box set. I also have the Subspecies Epic Collection DVD set. I have some of these films along with quite a few others in the Full Moon Archive collection. Gosh, I've had to have had that one for over 20 years. But anyway. Speaking of the Blu-ray, it's got a lot of extra stuff on it. I told you about the commentary by Nicolau Duff and Hove. It was great, but there's even a 9-minute behind-the-scenes making of featurette. I enjoyed this like so much because this is where I got the feeling that Anders Hove was kind of Klaus Kinski to Ted Nicolau, because apparently they got into a lot of arguments, and he kind of just seems like, I mean, if you see him, you kind of look at him, you can kind of tell he's got that kind of insanity, that kind of same crazy look that Kinski has, but you kind of like a mad spaz. But throughout the years, they've overcome this, and they're great friends. But apparently, it was suspect there for a while, and also there's a whole video zone on this on the Blu-ray that, like I said, I from the Coffin case. I think it's the same Blu-ray that they have. I just kind of got it as a collection there. But I'll say this, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I am such a huge fan of these video zones. I mean, from Charles Band doing an intro to the behind the scenes and the candid stuff with the actors, watching them now is interesting. Man, you get to see how young all the actors were and just the nostalgia from the trailers, the promos for merch, including the 1-800 number and the P.O. box for Full Moon. There was some interesting stuff on this video zone. The makeup guys Wayne Toth and Norm Cabrera, by the way, Wayne Toth has been involved in so many projects over the years. I'm sure you've heard of him. He did a lot of Hellraiser, did a lot of stuff you've heard of. But he played a heavy metal band in the Romanian dive bar in this movie. But not only did they play the characters, but they actually wrote and performed the metal songs for the movie. This video zone actually showed some of the Romanian village areas. It actually looked like something right out of the old days with the horse-drawn hay wagons, cobblestone streets, sheep herders doing their thing, which is great. The last thing I want to talk about in this episode is the Church of Chills. Charles Band bought a church over there in Cleveland that he used for film sets. He also hosts an event there every 6 months. He started in October 2024, where around 100 or so people show up and are presented with a variety show. I mentioned above that this film was featured in the most recent Church of Chills, which is the 11th of October. I think it's now the 7th or 28th right now. I'm not sure, and I don't want to look. But anyways, so that's why I decided to do that to do this movie for this video. For every one of these, there's been a featured film. The first Church of Chills was all about Deathstreamer. It had a screening of that movie. Did an interview and Q&A with the cast. The second Church of Chills was all about the original uncut version of the Puppet Master. And this last one was obviously about this movie, Subspecies II. This screened, and before it, actually, they had Hove Duff and Nicolau getting on stage, just being interviewed, having a good time. And they just, it just looked fun. And so, I don't know, man, telling stories about this movie. And after watching the behind the scenes in the Video Zone on the Blu-ray, I'd heard some of the anecdotes they shared, but it's so much fun just to see them all interact and tell even more stories and get even more insight into the movie. The Church of Chills also has a bunch of other fun stuff, such as auctions, meet and greets, stories from Charles, etc., etc. Good times. But anyways, like I said, great movie. 2 and 3 are my favorite, but they're all worth a watch. And anyhow, that's all I have for this episode. If you're not subscribed, why don't you just go and do that right now? Like, seriously, why aren't you? Don't forget to check out corpsecollective.com. Check out some of the other projects that we have going on. And thanks you guys so much for watching. And other than that, I guess I'll catch you guys later.